There is a river in the middle of nowhere that changed the name of a nation. It is called the Jabbok. It cuts through a gorge east of the Jordan, and if you stood beside it 3,000 years ago, you would have heard nothing but water over rock and wind through scrub brush. No city nearby. No road worth mentioning. Just dust and dark, and the sound of a man breathing hard. His name for now is Jacob. He is old. He is rich. He is terrified. Tomorrow morning he will see his brother Esau for the first time in 20 years. And the last time they were in the same room, Esau swore to kill him. Jacob has sent his wives ahead, his children, his servants, his livestock. Everything he owns is on the other side of the water. He has put every person he loves between himself and the thing he fears. And now he is alone. This is when the figure appears. The text does not say where the figure comes from. It does not say whether Jacob sees him first or feels him first. It says only this: a man wrestled with him until daybreak. You need to sit with that sentence. This is not a metaphor. This is not a vision. This is a physical fight that lasts the entire night. Hours of grappling in the dirt, beside a river in the dark. And the man Jacob is fighting, the text will make clear, as God. At some point before dawn, the figure touches Jacob's hip socket and wrenches it out of joint. One touch. The fight should be over. But Jacob does something that defies every instinct a wounded man has. He holds on tighter, and he says 6 words that will echo through every story we are about to tell. I will not let you go unless you bless me. The figure asks his name. Jacob tells him, and then the figure gives him a new one. Not Jacob the heel grabber. From now on, your name is Israel. Yisrael. In Hebrew, it means one who wrestles with God. Say that again slowly. The God of the universe just named a man, and through that man, an entire nation, an entire people. After the act of fighting with him, he walked away from that riverbank with 2 things: a new name and a limp. The hip never healed for the rest of his life. Every step Jacob took reminded him of the night he grabbed God and refused to let go. By the end of this video, you will understand why the limp mattered more than the name. And you will understand why God offered that same invitation to wrestle to every single person he ever trusted with something that mattered. This is not a video about obedience. This is not a video about getting it right. This is not a video about people who said yes to God the first time he asked. This is a video about every person in the Bible who pushed back, argued, ran, demanded answers, and even accused God of lying, and what God did next. Because there is a pattern hiding inside these stories, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here is the pattern. Every major figure in the Bible who wrestled with God, who fought, who doubted, who resisted, who raged, was not punished. They were promoted. They were trusted with more. They were given a new name, a new mission, a closer encounter with God than the people who never questioned anything. And that pattern starts here, at a river, in the dark, with a man who would not let go. The second wrestler shows up 400 years later, and he does not look like a hero. His name is Moses. He is 80 years old. He has spent the last 40 years herding sheep in a desert called Midian, which is not the life he planned. 40 years earlier, he was an Egyptian prince. He had power. He had education. He had every advantage a man could ask for. And one afternoon, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he killed the man with his own hands. That was the last time Moses tried to change the world. He ran, he hid. He married a shepherd's daughter, had sons, and spent 4 decades watching animals eat grass. If you had met Moses at age 79, you would have met a man who had made peace with irrelevance. He was done. The fire was out. And then a bush caught fire and did not burn. Here is what most people miss about the burning bush. It was not one conversation. It was an argument. Moses raises 5 objections in a row. and each one is more desperate than the last. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? What if they ask your name? What if they do not believe me? I am slow of speech, I cannot do this. And finally, the fifth objection, stripped of all excuses, down to the raw truth. Lord, please, send someone else. God answers the first four with patience. He gives Moses his name. He gives him signs: a staff that becomes a snake, a hand that turns leprous and heals. He promises to be with him. But at the fifth objection, the text says God's anger burned against Moses. Not because Moses doubted. God had handled doubt 4 times already. Because Moses said he did not want the mission at all. But even in anger, pay attention to this: God does not take the call away. He adds Aaron. He gives Moses a partner. The man who told God no 5 times walks out of that desert and into the throne room of the most powerful empire on earth. And here is the part of Moses' story that will matter at the end of this video. Years later, after the plagues, after the Red Sea, after Sinai, Moses makes one more demand. In Exodus 33, he says to God, "Show me your glory, not help me lead, not give me wisdom. Show me everything you are." He wanted the full encounter. God said no human could see his face and live. So he hid Moses in a crack in the rock and passed by. And Moses saw the back of God, the afterglow, the trailing edge of glory. The man who argued at the bush got closer to God than anyone in the Old Testament. The fighter did not get punished. He got proximity. But it gets stranger. The third wrestler did not argue with God's call. He simply ran from it. His name is Jonah, and his story is the strangest in the entire Bible. God tells him to go east to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, the nation that has been brutalizing Israel for generations. Jonah walks to the nearest port and buys a ticket on a ship heading west, as far west as the ancient world allowed. He is not confused about the direction. He knows exactly what he is doing. You know the next part. The storm, the sailors, the fish. 3 days in the belly of something that should have killed him. And when the fish vomits him onto a beach, Jonah finally goes to Nineveh. He preaches 8 words: 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. And the entire city repents. Every person, from the king to the cattle. It is the most successful evangelistic campaign in the history of the Bible. And Jonah is furious. He climbs a hill east of the city, builds a shelter, and waits for God to destroy Nineveh anyway. When God does not, Jonah explodes. "I knew it. I knew you were gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. That is exactly why I ran. Because I knew you would forgive them." You need to hear what Jonah is saying. He is not wrestling with the call. He is wrestling with God's character. He cannot accept that God would show mercy to the people who tortured his own nation. And honestly, if you sit with it long enough, you understand him. God grows a vine to shade Jonah, then sends a worm to kill the vine. Jonah is so angry about the dead plant that he asks to die. And God's final words in the book are a question. "You are concerned about this vine, which you did not tend or make grow. Should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left?" The book ends there. Jonah never answers. The question hangs in the air for 3,000 years. God does not resolve the argument. He trusts the reader. He trusts you to sit with it. Stay with me. The fourth wrestler is the one who breaks your heart. His name is Elijah. And 24 hours before this moment, he was the most powerful prophet alive. On Mount Carmel, he challenged 450 prophets of Baal to a contest. 1 altar each. The God who sends fire wins. You know what happened? Baal sent nothing. God sent fire that consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, and the water in the trench. It was the greatest display of divine power since Sinai. 1 day later, Elijah is running for his life. Not from an army. From one woman, Queen Jezebel, who sent a messenger with 4 words. Tomorrow you die. And this is the man who just called fire from heaven. This is the man who stood alone against an entire nation. And now he is sitting under a broom tree in the desert, and his prayer is this: it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life. You have felt this. Maybe not with those words, but you have felt the collapse that comes after the victory. The emptiness that arrives on Monday morning, after the breakthrough on Sunday. The moment when the adrenaline drains, and all that is left is exhaustion and the voice in your head that says none of it mattered. God's response to Elijah is one of the most tender scenes in all of Scripture. He does not rebuke him. He does not quote a verse at him. He sends an angel with bread and water. Elijah eats and sleeps. The angel comes back. More bread, more water, more sleep. God's prescription for the burned out wrestler is not a sermon. It is a meal and a nap. Then God sends him on a 40-day walk to Mount Horeb, the same mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. And there, in a cave, God passes by. A great wind, but God is not in the wind. An earthquake, God is not in the earthquake. A fire, God is not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound. The Hebrew is extraordinary. Kol damama daka. A sound of thin silence. A voice so quiet it could only be heard by someone who had stopped running. The man who asked to die heard a whisper, and the whisper sent him back to work. Do you see what is happening? Moses argued 5 times at a burning bush, and God gave him the mission anyway. Jonah bought a ticket in the wrong direction, and God chased him across an ocean. Elijah asked God to kill him, and God made him dinner. 3 wrestlers. 3 completely different kinds of fighting. One argued. One ran. One collapsed. And not a single one of them was punished for it. Not one. In fact, and this is the part that should stop you, every one of them was trusted with more after the wrestling than before it. Moses got closer to God's glory. Jonah got the most successful revival in biblical history. Elijah got the rarest thing God ever gave anyone, a whisper with his name in it. The pattern is real. And it does not stop here. In the second half of this video, the wrestling gets darker. The questions get harder. One man will demand that God stand trial. Another will accuse God of deception. And the last one, will stretch out his hands on a cross and quote a psalm that begins with the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? If this is landing for you, if you have ever felt like your faith is more of a fight than a formula, do me a favor. Subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, because the rest of this video is for people exactly like you. Everything we have seen so far, the arguments, the running, the burnout, those were fights born from reluctance, from fear, from exhaustion. What comes next is different. The next 3 wrestlers are not afraid of the mission. They are afraid that God is not who he says he is. The 5th wrestler is a man named Job, and his story begins with a sentence that should make you uneasy. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Blameless. The text does not say he was pretty good. It says blameless. And in a single day, one day, he loses everything. A messenger arrives. Your oxen and donkeys are gone. Raiders. While that messenger is still speaking, another arrives. Fire fell from the sky. Your sheep and servants are dead. While that one is still speaking, another. The Chaldeans took your camels and killed your men. While that one is still speaking, the final messenger. A wind struck the house where your sons and daughters were eating together. They are all dead. 10 children. One afternoon. And then his body breaks out in sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And he sits in an ash heap, scraping his skin with a piece of broken pottery. 3 friends arrive. They sit with him in silence for 7 days, which is the last good thing they do. For the next 30 chapters, they explain to Job why this is his fault. You must have sinned. God is just. Therefore you deserve this. Their theology is airtight. Their compassion is non-existent. And this is where it gets remarkable. Job does not accept it. He does not bow his head and say the pain must be deserved. He looks up at the sky and demands a trial. He uses legal language. He says, and you can read this in chapter 23, if only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Job wants to sue God. He wants a courtroom. He wants to stand before the judge of the universe with evidence and say, explain this. Not as a rebel, as a man who believed God was good and could not reconcile that belief with 10 graves and a body full of sores. For 35 chapters, God is silent. Job argues. His friends argue back. The ash heap gets colder. And then chapter 38, the sky cracks open. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. God does not explain. He does not give a reason for the suffering. He does not mention the children. He asks questions. 77 of them. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of Orion? Do you give the horse his might? Does the hawk take flight by your understanding? For 4 chapters, God pours out the architecture of reality oceans, and stars and mountain goats, and thunderstorms and the storehouses of snow. And the point is not that Job is wrong. The point is that Job is small. The frame is bigger than he can hold. And Job's response, his final response, is one sentence that has haunted readers for 3,000 years. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. He never got his explanation. He never learned why his children died. But he got something he did not have before the ash heap. He got a direct encounter with the living God. Before the suffering, Job knew about God. After the wrestling, Job had seen him. The limp again. The mark. The encounter that only comes through the fight. Pay attention to this. The 6th wrestler is a teenager who never stopped fighting for the rest of his life. His name is Jeremiah. He was called as a boy, probably 15 or 16, from the tiny priestly town of Anathoth, a few miles north of Jerusalem. His first words to God sound like a younger version of Moses. Ah, Lord God, I do not know how to speak. I am only a youth. God touched his mouth and told him to go. Jeremiah preached for 40 years. He watched his nation spiral toward destruction and begged them to turn back. They did not listen. They threw him in a cistern. They put him in stocks. His own family turned against him. The text says the men of Anathoth, his own hometown, plotted to kill him. He had almost no converts, almost no visible fruit. 40 years of faithfulness, with almost nothing to show for it. And in the middle of this, in chapter 20, verse 7, Jeremiah says something to God that no other prophet dares to say. You deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me, and you prevailed. Read that again. A prophet of God, a man chosen and called, and anointed, accusing God of deception, of tricking him into a life of suffering, of overpowering his will and dragging him into a mission that has produced nothing but pain. This is not polite doubt. This is not a prayer journal question. This is a man shaking his fist at heaven and saying, you lied to me. And the very next verse, the very next breath, Jeremiah says this. But if I say I will not mention him, or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am wary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. He cannot stop. Even after accusing God of deception, he cannot stop preaching. The wrestling did not produce victory. It did not produce answers. It produced something harder and rarer: faithfulness without results. Obedience without evidence that the obedience matters. There is one more thing. The 7th wrestler did something none of the others did. He stopped talking and started listening. His name is Habakkuk. He was likely a temple musician. The last verse of his book includes a note about stringed instruments, which suggests he served in the worship ministry in Jerusalem. And his book opens with a scream. How long, Lord, must I call for help, and you do not listen? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? This is not a man asking a theological question at a Bible study. This is a man watching his country collapse, violence, injustice, corrupt leaders, and demanding to know why God is allowing it. But here is what makes Habakkuk different from every other wrestler. After his complaint, he does not walk away. He does not collapse. He does not run. He climbs a watchtower. Chapter 2, verse 1. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me, and what answer I am to give to this complaint. He argues with God, and then positions himself to receive the answer. He builds a physical structure designed for waiting. He climbs up, sits down, crosses his arms, and says, I am not leaving until you speak. This was not a man who accepted silence. This was not a man who walked away. This was not a man who pretended the questions did not exist. This was a man who built a tower, climbed it, and refused to come down until God opened his mouth. And God answered, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. And then one line, 8 words in English. One of the most important sentences in the history of human faith. The righteous shall live by faith. That sentence traveled. Paul quoted it in his letter to the Romans. The writer of Hebrews quoted it. 1500 years later, a German monk named Martin Luther read it, and it cracked his theology open like an egg. The Protestant Reformation, the movement that reshaped Western civilization, traces one that sparks back to a sentence God gave to an impatient musician on a watchtower who refused to come down. Born from an argument, born from a man who screamed how long, and then waited. We have now walked through 7 wrestlers. A schemer at a river, a fugitive at a bush, a runaway prophet on a boat, a burned out man under a tree, a sufferer in ashes, a teenager who preached to silence, a musician on a watchtower who refused to come down. Every one of them pushed back against God. Every one of them argued, ran, collapsed, or demanded answers. And every one of them was not cast aside, but pulled closer. Now we come to the final 3, and the stakes are no longer personal. They are eternal. Here is the part nobody tells you. The 8th wrestler is the most famous doubter in history. His name is Thomas. In Greek, he is called Didymus the Twin, and for 2,000 years, the church has called him Doubting Thomas, as though doubt were his crime. It was not his crime. It was his gift. Here is the scene. Jesus has been crucified, buried. 3 days have passed, and on the evening of the first day of the week, Jesus appears to the disciples in a locked room. He shows them his hands and his side. They are overjoyed. But Thomas was not there. The text does not say where he was. Maybe he was grieving alone. Maybe he could not bear to be in a room full of people talking about a dead man. Whatever the reason, he missed it. And when the others told him, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas said, the most human sentence in the New Testament. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." You have said a version of this. Maybe not about nail marks. But you have stood in a room where everyone else seemed certain and you were not. You have heard the testimony and felt nothing. You have wanted to believe and found that wanting was not enough. Thomas is not the villain of this story. Thomas is the person who could not fake it. A week passes. 7 days of silence. 7 days of being the only one in the room who has not seen. And then Jesus walks through a locked door again. And this time he looks directly at Thomas. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." The Greek word Jesus uses, apistia, does not mean what you think. It is not a condemnation. It is closer to a command. Stop being without trust. Come back to trust. It is the voice of a father pulling a child out of the water, not pushing him under. And Thomas answers with 6 words that scholars have argued about for 2 millennia. "My Lord and my God." This is the highest declaration of who Jesus is in all 4 Gospels. Not Peter, who walked with Jesus for 3 years. Not John, who leaned against his chest at supper. Thomas, the doubter. The man who refused to believe without evidence. He said it. He saw the wounds and understood something the others had not yet put into words. That the man standing in front of him was not just teacher, not just rabbi, not just risen prophet, but God. The wrestler made the greatest confession. And according to Eusebius, the early church historian, writing in the 4th century, Thomas later traveled farther than any other apostle. Tradition places him in Parthia, and India, the edge of the known world. The man who could not believe without touching the wounds carried the message farther than anyone who never doubted at all. Now watch what happens next. The 9th wrestler was not a reluctant follower. He was an enemy. His name was Saul. He was born in Tarsus, a Roman citizen by birth, educated under the great Rabbi Gamaliel in Jerusalem. He was a Pharisee, not a casual one, but a zealot. And when the early followers of Jesus began to grow, Saul made it his personal mission to destroy them. He was there when they killed Stephen, the first Christian martyr. The men who threw the stones laid their coats at Saul's feet. He watched. He approved. And then he went house to house, dragging men and women to prison. This was not a man who ignored God. This was a man who believed he was serving God by destroying God's people. His wrestling was not reluctance. It was war. And on the road to Damascus, with arrest warrants in his bag, a light from heaven knocked him to the ground and blinded him. And the voice said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Not why are you persecuting my followers? Me." Every chain Saul had fastened, every door he had kicked in, every family he had torn apart, Jesus took it personally. The enemy was fighting God and did not know it. 3 days of blindness. A man named Ananias, terrified, because he knew exactly who Saul was, laid hands on him. Something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and the greatest persecutor of the early church became its greatest missionary. Saul became Paul. The enemy became the apostle. But the wrestling did not end on the Damascus road. Years later, after shipwrecks and beatings and prison cells, and churches planted across the Roman Empire, Paul writes about a thorn. 2 Corinthians, chapter 12. "There was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me." He never says what it was. Scholars have guessed for centuries: bad eyesight, chronic pain, a speech impediment, recurring illness. Paul never names it. 3 times he begged God to take it away. 3 times. And God's answer was not healing. God's answer was 8 words. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul carried that thorn for the rest of his life. Like Jacob's limp, like Moses' stutter, like Elijah's memory of the broom tree, the mark of the encounter, the proof that the wrestling was real and that God's answer was not removal, but presence. And now we come to the last wrestler. And this one will cost you something to hear. It is a Friday afternoon. The sky over Jerusalem has gone dark at noon, which does not happen. There is a man on a Roman cross on a hill called Golgotha, and he has been hanging there for 6 hours. His lungs are collapsing. His blood pressure is dropping. Every breath is a fight against gravity and iron. And in the darkness, he opens his mouth and speaks. Not to the soldiers, not to the crowd, not to his mother standing below. He speaks to his Father. My God, why have you forsaken me? Those are not his words. They are David's. Psalm 22, verse 1, written 1,000 years earlier by a king who felt abandoned by the God who had anointed him. Jesus on the cross reaches back across a millennium and grabs the words of another wrestler. The Son of God is wrestling with the Father. This is not theology for a classroom. This is the center of the Christian faith. And it is violent and dark and far more honest than most sermons will admit. In this moment, Jesus experiences the one thing that has never existed in eternity: separation from God. The Trinity fractures. The Son cries out, and heaven is silent. You have had that night. 3 in the morning. The ceiling above you. The question you could not stop asking. Why did this happen? Why did you not stop it? Are you even there? You have lain in that darkness and whispered something that felt like blasphemy, and also felt like the most honest prayer you had ever prayed. The 3M argument that is the wrestling, and the God who let Jacob grip him by the riverbank, who fed Elijah under the broom tree, who answered Job from the whirlwind, who showed Thomas his wounds, that God does not walk away from your 3M prayer. He has heard it before. His own Son prayed it, and now the open loop closes. Jacob walked away with a limp. Moses' face glowed so bright they covered it with a veil. Elijah heard a whisper no one else could hear. Job saw God with his own eyes. Jeremiah carried a fire in his bones he could not extinguish. Habakkuk received a sentence that would reshape Western civilization. Thomas touched wounds that should not have existed on a living body. Paul carried a thorn he never named. Every single wrestler walked away marked. The limp was never the punishment. The limp was the proof. Proof that the wrestling was real. Proof that God showed up. Proof that when you grab hold of God and say, I will not let go until you bless me, He does not pull away. He leans in. If you have made it this far in this video, you are the kind of person this channel was made for. You are not here for easy answers. You are here because the questions matter to you. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear that God is not afraid of their fight. So what do we do with this? 9 wrestlers, spanning 2,000 years of scripture. A schemer, a fugitive, a runaway prophet, a suicidal miracle worker, a man in ashes, a teenager who preached to silence, a musician on a tower, a doubter in a locked room, an enemy on a road, and a son on a cross. Every single one of them pushed back against God, and every single one of them was met not with punishment, but with presence. 3 things to carry with you. First, every major figure God used in the Bible from Jacob to Paul pushed back before they moved forward. Not some of them. All of them. The pattern is not an accident. It is a design. God does not seem to be looking for people who say yes on the first ask. He seems to be looking for people who care enough to fight. Obedience was never the entry requirement. Wrestling was. Second, if you are in a season right now where your faith feels more like a war than a worship service, where the questions are louder than the answers, and the silence from heaven feels personal, you are not failing. You are not falling away. You are standing in a tradition that includes Moses and Jeremiah and Job and Thomas and Jesus himself. The Christ tradition is not blind agreement. The Christ tradition is wrestling. And third, and this is the one I need you to hear, God did not name his chosen people Israel, the ones who obey. He named them Israel, the ones who wrestle. He had every word in every language at his disposal. He could have chosen a name that meant the faithful or the surrendered, or the ones who trust without question. He did not. He chose a name that means one who struggles with God. He stamped it on an entire nation. He built a civilization on it. He wrote it into the identity of every person who would ever call on his name. Because the God of the Bible is not looking for people who never question him. He is looking for people who will not let go. Which wrestler in this video hit you the hardest? Was it Jacob at the river, Job in the ashes, Thomas in the locked room? Or was it someone else, Jeremiah accusing God of deception, or Elijah asking to die the day after calling fire from heaven? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And the next time you find yourself up at 3 in the morning, arguing with a God you are not even sure is listening, do not apologize for it. Do not be ashamed of it. Grip tighter. He can take it. He has been taking it since a man grabbed him by a riverbank in the dark and refused to let go until the sun came up.